Chapter 10. Mason. Mason dragged his feet as he walked down the hall to Clara's office. He didn't want to meet with her today, not after last night's dinner, but not meeting with her would get back to Coach, which would put him in more trouble. So he'd get in, get wrapped up, and get out. No focusing on her or the past, just business. "Hey!" She looked up as he knocked on her door. She stood, but there was a look of uncertainty on her face. "About last night," he held up his hand. "Forget it. You were right. There's no need to rehash the past. We aren't dating. You're my trainer, nothing more." A look of hurt flashed across her eyes, but Mason ignored it. He needed to focus on the game and not on Clara. Crossing to the bed, he sat down and propped up his ankle. "Right," she said, blinking. "Did you put it up last night after I left at least?"
"Of course I did. And there's still nothing to worry about. I just stood up too fast last night is all."
Clara pursed her lips and shook her head as she began examining his ankle. "You know that's not true. I'm really worried about you playing Sunday, but Justin said the decision was yours." Mason tensed. "You told Justin?" Clara paused and bit her lip. She evidently hadn't meant to let that slip. "I had to, Mason. You may not like my advice, but I would have told him if it were any other player." Mason blew out a disgusted breath. "I can't believe you, Clara. I'm not just any other player. I thought—" He shut his mouth. There was no way he was telling her that he'd thought they would have a second chance now. She could have ruined his career. "You thought what?"
"Nothing. It doesn't matter. Examine me, tape me up, and let me get out there. I've got a final practice to get through before game day on Sunday."
The hurt deepened on her face, etching out tiny lines in her forehead and near her eyes, but she said nothing more. After examining the ankle, she wrapped it in tape and handed him some ibuprofen. "Be sure to take these, and I'll see you after practice for a massage."
"You know what? I think I'll skip the after-practice massage," Mason said as he took the pills. "I've got a date with the hot tub tonight, which should do the trick."
Clara looked like she wanted to argue, but she merely nodded and returned to her desk. Mason thought he would feel better about his victory. After all, he had basically won that sparring match. So why did he feel even worse? The image of the hurt brimming in Clara's eyes refused to leave his mind. A night out. That's what he needed tonight. He'd do his hot tub soak, shower, and then see if Duke was up for some company. With his night planned, he forced a smile to his face and jogged out onto the field.
"So, last week you were gushing about her, and now you don't like her?" Duke asked, dipping his French fry in ketchup before shoving it in his mouth.
Mason had managed to convince Duke to postpone the regular Friday night poker game and come out to dinner with him since he would be boarding a plane tomorrow and heading to the hotel they'd stay in before the playoff game on Sunday.
"She could have damaged my career, Duke, over nothing, just a little strain."
He told himself it was nothing so often that he was almost believing it. Duke took a sip of his Coke and then scratched the side of his face.
"I don't understand. If it's just a strain, how could that have damaged your career? You've played with strains before, right?"
Mason realized his mistake and tried to backpedal.
"Yeah, but she thinks it's something more. If Justin had told the coach, they might have benched me until it was checked out. And there is no way I'm missing Sunday's game."
He took a bite of his grilled chicken and dropped his gaze to his plate, hoping Duke wouldn't press the issue.
"And what does she think it is?"
No such luck.
"Achilles tendonitis, but she's wrong."
Duke set down his burger and leaned forward.
"And what if she isn't wrong? What can happen?"
Mason swallowed. He hadn't wanted to think about it, but ever since Clara had mentioned it, he'd spent a fair amount of time Googling the injury.
"If she's right, and I continue to play on it, there is an increased chance of a tear or a rupture."
"A rupture?" The words exploded from Duke's mouth, turning a few nearby heads their direction. He lowered his voice and leaned forward. "Meaning you couldn't walk?" Mason used his fork to move his broccoli around on his plate. He really wanted a burger and fries like Duke, but the spaghetti from a few days ago was still sitting heavy in his stomach. He needed to eat clean until the game now to be in his best condition. He speared a broccoli and dipped it in some of the teriyaki sauce that had pooled off his chicken. Anything to keep his gaze from the fiery eyes of his brother. "The risk is small, Duke, and if something happens, there are surgeries now that could fix me up over the summer. I just need to get through the playoff games. Then I can rest it." "Why?" Duke leaned back and crossed his arms. "Why is it so important you win another championship game? You won last year. You've shown me the ring a dozen times to prove it. So why do you have to win again?" "Because..." Mason paused. He didn't really have a good reason. Because he needed to prove he could? Why? That had been his fueling mantra, but it had existed because he'd needed to prove to Clara they belonged together. He'd become a professional to prove to her father he was good enough, and to make sure he had the kind of money she was used to. He'd pushed himself hard last year to prove he was the best, so that if he ever had a second chance, she'd have no reason to say no. But none of that had mattered. His present hadn't changed anything because she still wouldn't tell him about the past. "I don't know," Mason said. "It's just part of the game. It's what we work all year for, you know?" "I do know," Duke said, with a tone that showed he did understand, even if his job was different. "I work hard pitching presentations, and sometimes I work on them for months, but we don't get the client. However, not getting a client isn't the end of the world. There are always more clients, just like there will always be more games, as long as you take care of yourself." Duke's words made sense, and deep down, Mason knew it was more than a strain. Or maybe it was a strain, but a pretty bad one. A part of him even knew that Clara was probably right and he shouldn't play in Sunday's game. But he also knew he wouldn't sit it out. He couldn't. He needed to be right. He just no longer knew why.